Okay, you guys, we're now going to take a look at exercise 418. Here we're dealing with overhead. And in 418 and 417, we're dealing with either over-applied factory overhead or under-applied factory overhead. Now, if you'll remember from managerial accounting, factory overhead, actual factory overhead, goes on the books as a debit. Our estimate of factory overhead, which is included in work in process, then later on finished goods and cost of goods sold, our estimate of overhead or applied overhead goes on the books as a credit. We hope that estimate's perfect, but it's usually not. So if we get to the end of the year and we have a debit balance in factory overhead, that means actual cost, actual factory overhead cost, was more than our estimate. So it's said to be under-applied if we have a debit balance in the factory overhead account. And that means we actually didn't include enough overhead in our inventory accounts and our expense account, work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold. So here on exercise 418, there's a remaining debit balance of $25,000 in the overhead account for Newark Plastics. At year end, the balance was determined to be large. So a larger balance, we're going to allocate it between our three accounts that should contain overhead: work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold. So part of our overhead for that year would be in work in process, part would be in finished goods, and once the finished goods are sold, part of that overhead for the year would be in cost of goods sold. What we're saying here is we lacked $25,000, including enough overhead in those three accounts. So we're going to split it between the three. We'll start with work in process, and the amount there, the balance of the account is $60,000. Then for finished goods, I'm going to say inventory. It's really not necessary. I'm sure you guys know those are inventory accounts, but I'm going to include it anyway. Our finished goods inventory, the balance is $40,000. And then for cost of goods sold, the balance at the end of the year was $150,000. Now that's a total of $250,000. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put this in here. Now the $250,000 will be our 100% amount. Now we want to know what percentage is $60,000 of the total $250,000. So that's going to be equal to $60,000 divided by $250,000. And that gives you 0.24. Let's format these as percentage. Okay, and let's continue here. $40,000 divided by $250,000 shows that finished goods inventory represents 16% of these three account balances. And then the $150,000 divided by $250,000. Cost of goods sold makes up 60%. Okay, now what we're going to do is this $25,000 in under-applied overhead, meaning it's $25,000 that should have been included in these three accounts, but it wasn't. Okay, because we underestimated or under-applied overhead for the year by $25,000. So we're going to add that $25,000 to these three accounts using these percentages. So we'll use these three. Okay, so our amount for work in process would be equal to our underapplied overhead. Remember, debit balance is underapplied, credit balance will be overapplied. So your homework problem is going to be overapplied. So that'll change the journal entry for you a little bit. This part will be completed the same way. Okay, times our percentage for work in process. Okay, for finished goods, it will again be equal to the underapplied overhead, $25,000 that needs to be spread between these three accounts, times the finished goods percentage, and then the $25,000 times the cost of goods sold percentage. That's $15,000, so we get a total that should come back to $25,000, and it does. Okay, so then I'm going to make the journal entry here. I'll use this as my debit column, this is my credit column. Okay, what we're going to do is add some overhead to these three accounts. So we're going to debit work in process for $6,000. Okay, we're going to debit finished goods for $4,000. And let's go ahead and include inventory on there. Because remember, those are inventory accounts. I'm sure you know that by now. And then we're going to debit cost of goods sold for $15,000. And you guys, these two are asset accounts. This is an expense account. They all increase on the debit side. And we want to increase their balance for their share of the amount that we underestimated overhead by. Their share is based on their relative balances at the end of the year and the percentages we calculated there. Now, factory overhead had a debit balance of $25,000, which means it was underestimated or underapplied, so we're adding more overhead to these accounts. But we want to bring that overhead balance to zero. Well, it had a debit balance for $25,000. To zero it out, we're going to have to credit factory overhead for $25,000. Okay, now exercise 417, your homework problem is going to be a little tricky for you, because there they have a credit balance in overhead, meaning it was over applied. This part would be calculated the exact same way, but when you get to your entry, I'll let you figure it out. We're going to have to take some overhead away from each of these accounts. Okay? Alright, good luck with that one.